Call to order a regular meeting for the Normal Town Council for November 21st, 2016. Please call the roll.
Mayor Coos.
Here.
Mr. Fritzen.
Here.
Mr. Preston.
Here.
Mr. McBride.
Here.
Mrs. Lorenz. Here. Mr. McCarthy.
Here.
Ms. Gaines. Here.
We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We've had two requests to address the council concerning matters on the agenda tonight. First up, we'll ask Mr. Turatelli to come forward.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mark Turatelli, resident of Normal, Timber Ridge Court. I'm here to talk about the proposed tax levy increase tonight. So first, I want to thank the council for the opportunity to speak, and I applaud all of you for aggressively funding the police and fire pensions over the years. I know that Normal is in better shape than most of the other communities throughout the state, and that is commendable, especially Mr. Hoon and his finance team for tracking all those arcane details, Wendy and your staff for making all that available to the public. I really do appreciate it. And as much as I support those efforts, I strongly oppose the mechanism that's proposed here tonight. My contention is there's plenty of room in the general fund to accomplish these goals of approximately $500,000 a year. In talking with a lot of residents, I've noticed that the number one comment is the high cost of the property taxes. And any increase is really kind of onerous right now, especially given that McLean County is increasing the levy. Their window is closing on 10-year opportunity. They've decided to increase. Heartland has just levied a 9% increase in their levy. The taxes keep going up on that. So in light of all that, we've had a lot of opportunities within the general fund to take care of these obligations. We've committed $88,000 a year to Sagster. We paid $500,000 out of the general fund to demolish a privately owned property on Beach Street. We've given nearly $1 million to buy out and renovate Terry Ryburn's filling station, $40,000 to build a canopy for Stout Chiropractic, $67,000 for a fiber connection to Distill, all private enterprises out of the general fund. And while they may be worthwhile, there's a higher priority in terms of funding public safety and its obligations. And all of that could be taken out of the general fund. We've got plenty of opportunities. We just sold a house at an $85,000 loss. With a little bit of budget tightening, we could manage this without levying more taxes on the residents. And that is my main contention tonight. I encourage the council to look at those issues in detail and to see if it isn't something that we could do without further burdening the taxpayers on top of the sales tax increase that we already had this year. So thank you for your time. Look forward to a good meeting tonight.
And next up would be Mr. Ron Ulmer.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, for allowing me to address you tonight. I'm speaking on the same issue as the person before me. I'm opposing the property tax increase that comes under general order in this meeting. It comes right on top of the recent 1% increase in sales tax by Normal and Bloomington, of which 1/4% goes to create and maintain the mental health facility at the jail, which I strongly support, and 1/4 to Connect Transit. I do have two questions. One, if Connect Transit shuts down in January, where does the funding that the town of Normal, the 1/4% tax increase and any other funding that they normally use to subsidize Connect Transit, where do they go? And how will they be used? My other question is where is the 0.5% of the sales tax that isn't designated going? Can it be used to fund the pension funds? And should Connect Transit shut down, I hope it doesn't, I believe all the town funds designated for Connect Transit go to providing taxi and Uber rides for the most needy to get to work, medical appointments, and other services to maintain as much independent living as possible. If this property tax passes, I recommend reducing the recent 1% sales tax that is to 0.5%, and in other words, removing the undesignated half. As I've previously stated at council meetings, I am always opposed to sales taxes as they are regressive. Let's face it, the middle and the lower income people, economic level people, are really hurting. Pay and pension benefits of the public sector employees have outpaced the private sector citizens of the community who support the government for the past decade and 2 decades for many citizens. I have yet to find a retiree in the private sector who receives an increase in their pension. And Social Security benefits over the last decade have averaged 1.5% increase, a true COLA, not a fixed 3%. And I just abhor the state of Illinois has used COLA for a fixed rate increase. That is not a COLA. Matter of fact, 2 of the recent years, Social Security has gone up 0%. We repeatedly hear in the news that the median incomes in the private sector have decreased, as I said, for the last decade or 2 for many citizens. I believe the town should be able to meet its funding needs from the 1% increase in the sales tax, coupled with the assessed valuation from new construction, which increases property taxes. Even though Normal and McLean County are economically better off than most counties in the state, the number of people in McLean County is declining, although the population is growing. The number of college graduates, whether they go to in-state or out-of-state college, that remain in Illinois is shrinking. We're losing our educated and our most productive young people. Higher taxes by any government entity exacerbate the outflow of the educated and productive from Illinois. And Illinois as a whole and many communities have had a real drain of productive people. The economic decline picks up speed as taxes are increased. I'd appreciate you considering these things when you consider the tax increase. Thank you very much.
We will move on to the omnibus vote agenda. Items that are considered routine will be handled by one vote unless a council member would like to pull an item for discussion. And I would like to be excused on voting on any bills. I may have incurred my duties as mayor. And going around the room, Mr. Pritzen.
Yes, I'd ask to be excused from voting on Bloomington offset bills.
Motion for approval.
Move approval.
Second.
Items considered on the omnibus agenda tonight are approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of November 7th, 2016, and approval of town of Normal expenditures for payment as of November 16th, 2016. Resolution waiving the formal bidding process and authorizing the purchase of metal tree gates for trees located in the area of Uptown Circle from Urban Accessories in the amount of $25,459 and approving an associated budget adjustment. A resolution authorizing the purchase of Atlas filter replacement parts from Natatorium Consulting Services of Carlisle, Ontario, Canada, in the amount of $23,052, and that's for the Fairview Family Aquatic Center. A resolution authorizing the execution of an intergovernmental agreement with the City of Bloomington, McLean County, and the Ecology Action Center for solid waste management services. A resolution authorizing the execution of an intergovernmental agreement concerning the McLean County Geographic Information System Consortium and authorizing an amendment and termination of the prior agreements. And finally, an ordinance establishing parking restrictions on Shepherd Road between Airport Road and Canyon Creek Road. Please call the roll.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz? Aye. Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Ms. Gaines?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The omnibus agenda is approved. We have 2 items of general orders tonight. The first is a motion to authorize the preparation of the 2016 property tax levy ordinance.
Move approval.
Thank you.
Second.
Is there a discussion on this item?
I think
Ms. Gaines?
one of the things that was brought up was, have you considered, maybe we should consider this, and maybe we should consider something different. And I guess I want to assure people that I think there's been a whole lot of things looked at to consider. I don't want to pay any more tax, I know that. But we all need to be talking, the state of Illinois is making most of these decisions, is making all of these decisions for us as far as what we have to pay. And it has just been going up all the time. And it's a problem across the country. It's not just here in Normal, it's not just in Illinois, it's everywhere across the country. So I just want people to know that we have thought through this. This is not a knee-jerk reaction. It's something that troubles all of us whenever we have to raise any kind of taxes. So I think that's the biggest thing I wanted to share.
Thank you. Mr. McCarthy?
I just wanted to highlight that some of you may have seen in the newspaper today that the city of Dallas is on the edge of some financial troubles because of their pensions and because of a variety of reasons depending on the source you read. But I do agree with the speakers that we have been aggressively managing them. And when we talk about being conservative with our money, generally we talk about cost-cutting measures, and that's certainly a way to go about this. But as my counterpart just mentioned, unfortunately, the control for the demand on our budget is not with us. Unfortunately, the burden for paying for it does. And so some of the tough decisions and discussions that my counterpart is talking about is that do we sacrifice future investment at the expense of pensions? And so we are looking at those things very closely. It's great to see in this that the IMRF, one of our pension levies, is actually reduced this year. I don't think that kind of thing, when it happens, it's rare. And it wasn't big. It was a small decrease, but it does actually happen sometimes. And we're fortunate this time that the levy is small. But this problem is far from over. The state of Illinois still has the control of this, and they're still passing along this burden down to us. And unfortunately for us, it's our responsibility to make sure we do it. And with markets performing or underperforming as they are and portfolios not doing as well, I, for one, am committed to doing this, but sometimes that means we have to spend a little bit more money to be conservative. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lorenz?
Yeah, weigh in here with a couple of questions, I think, maybe to get a little dialogue going. The questions were raised, and I think it's deserving perhaps of an answer, and whether that comes from a staff member or any one of us up here at the table. But a lot of discussion about, well, could you use other sources of funds? Reference was made a couple of times here tonight to the sales tax. So what is the answer to that? Is that even allowed? And then I guess the other question, maybe a bit dramatic, but kind of the way my thought process goes is, on a lot of decisions is, what if you don't do it? What happens? And, the proverbial, you kick the can down the road, and what does that look like a year from now? So maybe a little discussion around those two items, whether that come from staff or other members of the council.
Well, I'm going to jump right in because I think they are fair questions. And these are questions that have certainly been asked by council of each other in our strategic retreats and our thought process in moving through this. First off, I think we say this often, and it doesn't always sink in, but the pensions that we fund are set by the state of Illinois, and they're set without concern of budget because there are no budgetary influences on their decisions. And the state legislatures are in a very good position where they can say, I can do something for someone in my state, but I don't have to worry about how it gets done. That's the municipality's job. So we have been handed over my term and terms before some pretty onerous pension obligations that we wouldn't agree with. And if we were able to control our pension policies locally, we would not make those decisions. But we don't have that choice by state law. In terms of the long-term policy of this council has been to fund police and fire pensions through the top property tax rate. And we've done a pretty good job over the years of keeping it fairly flat with some modest increases, and we've had a decrease since 1 year in my term of office. And it is always our intention to keep property taxes as flat and as low as we can, but we do need to fund our pensions. We can't fall behind on our pensions. And we talked about taking money out of the general fund and decided that wasn't a prudent step. That would be a 1 year, short-term fix, but that's not going to address the long-term funding scenario that we need to address in our pension funding. So, yes, we could have done it, and going into an election cycle may have been the political thing to do, but it probably wasn't the smart thing to do for the community. And the issue that drives this, again, I've said this in previous meetings, is the fact that municipalities and private industry throughout the country are facing an issue where the return on investment for the pension monies that they invest for future pension fundings are lean, and they've been lean, and they don't show any sign of getting any better. So for us to maintain the pension level funding, we have to add a little bit more. Now, hopefully someday that interest income will come back into a normal scenario, but it doesn't show any sign of doing it right now. And the third thing that this council has always been strong about, and I appreciate that, is the fact that they're going to own the problem that they're handed. They're not going to say some future council can deal with this. We've seen other municipalities, as Mr. McCarthy referred to, and we've seen the state of Illinois do this, where they don't address the problem when it's presented to them. They just kick it down the road. This council's been very firm that they will not do that going forward. Mr. Fritzen.
Yeah, I appreciate. One of the notes I made was the investment income issue, and that doesn't just touch our pension plans. It's touching individuals, retirees in particular, that are squeezed. So we're sensitive to that. I think too, as you've said, we're going to own the problem, but we've also, over the years, been extremely sensitive to the other governing bodies in our area that rely more heavily on the property tax than even we do, and have kept our levy and our tax rate pretty steady. And so when it comes time for us to have to consider an increase, though it doesn't necessarily make it easier, I don't feel guilt over the fact that we have to consider this in light of those things that I've mentioned and you mentioned. One of the reasons the property tax is where we go for the funds for the pensions in particular, and there's other things that we fund out of it, but is because they're the most non-elastic funds we have. And so there's other revenues that come into the general fund that perhaps could be tapped, but they aren't as solid as the property tax revenue. And as all of you have said, we have this obligation that has been handed to us, and we're living up to that obligation. And so it makes sense to me that we use the funds that are the most solid and most reliable in order to meet that obligation. A few years ago, I touched base with Mr. Peterson today to refresh my memory, but a few years ago, and he confirmed it 4 years ago actually, where we passed up an opportunity to increase the levy. And there were several reasons for that, and we paid for it a year later. Yeah. We had to restore what we decided not to levy, and then some, because we don't know what a year from now is going to bring, now do we? So at that time, we had almost twice as the percentage increase as what we're looking at here tonight. So we could reduce it and kick the can down the road, as many others have done, and roll the dice, and maybe investment income will pick up in the next 12 months, but maybe it won't. Maybe one thing we have discussed is that we have to perhaps consider lowering our expected investment income even further than we have already, and we've done that before, and that's one of the things we're looking at again. So, if we were to lessen the impact today, my gut feeling is it's going to increase the impact next year or the year after that, until some things in the economy get straightened out that we don't control. The other thing we don't want to lose sight of are the abatements. Now, this levy, and listed in our report, are abatements of property taxes that we have to include in the levy, but then we can come back later and abate them, and we have done that historically as well. And many of those are in regards to our bond issues and our debt. And so we are paying for for other things out of our general fund revenue that could be paid for out of the property taxes. And so let's not lose sight of that as well. So I think those are some important things to consider. And again, as Ms. Gaines said, I don't think, we pay them too. None of us want to pay the increases, but I think, some private investment, some public-private partnership type things were mentioned here tonight. And most of those things, all of those things, depending on your point of view, are part of creating the momentum that we have in Normal and Bloomington for communities that have created a vision and enacted steps necessary to bring that vision into reality. And those are things that help keep the property tax burden spread. And as soon as we step back from that, we actually are making a U-turn. If we back off from that and stifle some of that momentum that we have in the growth and the activity within our community, we aren't going to have assessed value increases. They've been pretty modest. And we've had some caution with some of our other revenue sources, as expressed, this fall when we do our review. There's some caution there, and so, this is an increase that takes into account that caution, the suppression of assessed value increases that we've experienced over the last several years. But I think if we draw back now, because if we pull these monies out of the general fund, something gives somewhere. Whether it be programming or some of that public-private partnership or employment, some of those types of considerations, which we looked at all those things when we were deep in the recession. And when we looked at that list of things that we might potentially have to cut in order to get our reserve back up to a level that we were comfortable with, there were some hurtful things in there and things that would change Normal from the community it is and the community that we keep hearing people like, and they like what we're doing, and they like the direction we're taking. If we stifle those things, then I don't think it's necessarily a hold steady. Like I said, I think it starts to a turnaround, and getting that momentum turned back in a positive way doesn't happen overnight. And so I think we have to be careful in that. I think we are careful and I think it's proved in our financial status, our standing among those that outside sources that review these things, considering the state that we are in the central portion of, and the like. Our financial position is outstanding, and I think we have been cautious, and I think this is something that takes into consideration all those different aspects of it, and it's something that we none of us enjoy it, but I think it's the right move. It's a thing we have to do to protect who we are and where we're headed.
Thank you. Mr. McBride?
There's one thing I think I'd like to convey, maybe to those who don't know, and obviously everybody up here knows it, but, and I believe one of my colleagues mentioned our recent retreat. I mean, that's 14 hours of meetings over 2 days, and I certainly understand why folks don't have the time and quite likely the inclination to sit there and watch us go back and forth for 14 hours, but this is an issue that is talked about, and these trade-offs were talked about extensively, as they are every year. So I would like people to kind of keep that in mind. To Mr. Fritzen's point, you know, there's a lot of responsibility involved with this, and it's very much a balancing act. And sadly, the situation that has been placed upon us means that we're going to have to pay the price somewhere. Is it with this, or is it with potential program costs, or is it with deferred maintenance, or is it with allowing a community eyesore and potentially dangerous property to remain standing? So those are all the things that we try to balance, and certainly making pension obligations a priority is something that this council and people way before I ever sat up here have made a top priority, and I'm really happy that we're doing so. But again, it's not easy, and it's not fun, and as, again, one of my colleagues mentioned, we pay them too. So we hear you, we understand, but we're doing what we think is the best thing we can do with it.
Mr. Preston?
Like many others, I share the concern of increased property taxes. As many people know, I own a real estate company, and I've got a number of properties in McLean County, and like all of us with our homes, for those who own homes, this kind of stuff is real, and it hits the kitchen table, and I don't like raising taxes on properties or, property tax or anything else for that matter. But we're in a situation, as many people have addressed up here, where we are state mandated to meet certain funding levels, and I think we can, look maybe just 60 or 70 miles south to Springfield and see that, boy, if we don't meet our funding obligations with pensions, as some would argue the state has not, the effects of that. And with that in mind and that mandate, the question then becomes, okay, if you're mandated to, where does the money come from and how do you pay for it? And something that Mr. Fritzen highlighted on, and I think it's worth repeating, is that one of the benefits of doing so through the property tax is that it is a levy. So rather than just setting the rate, and the actual amount of dollars that are coming in fluctuates based on, like sales tax, how much people buy, and, food and beverage, how much people eat and drink. The property tax levy, we know the full dollar figure of income that will be coming in for it. And, the benefit of that with this mandated funding is predictability. And it ensures that we're meeting our obligations. And again, I'm certainly not one to want to raise taxes. But beyond that, I'm also not one to want to kick the can down the road and pay double, have an issue that is that's twice as large and twice as problematic than it is today by not dealing with it.
Thank you. Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Ms. Gaines?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The ordinance is approved. Item 7 is a motion to initiate a zoning text amendment to include tap room with Class P liquor license within the list of permitted uses in the M1 restricted manufacturing. I got it.
Okay.
Second.
Thank you.
Sounds like you visited a tap room.
It does. Yes, it does. Is there discussion on this item? Mr. McCarthy?
Yeah. And this may be for Mr. Peterson or staff. It mentions differentially considering parking requirements for these establishments, and I was just curious how we go about. I'm assuming there's some math
There
behind
is.
this, but
Yeah, Mr. Tremmel will explain it, hopefully.
So is it specifically relates to this?
So there was the
Driving.
M1 parking requirement,
Correct.
and then
Yeah.
the square footage that's related to the tap rooms. I got the sense that we would be calculating parking.
Yeah, that'll certainly be an
quantities
element
based.
if this makes its way through the process. Generally speaking, manufacturing districts are going to be assessed parking at a much lower rate. So for example, in warehouse settings, you're going to assess parking at one space for every 600 square feet or so. Depending on what's going on, maybe 2,400 square feet. So it's a fairly low parking ratio. When you introduce retail or office, that type of thing, that ratio goes up with the expectation there'll be more folks living or operating from a site. So as suggested in the initiated text amendment, there would be a limit on the amount of square footage associated with a microbrewery.
25%,
Limits it to
yeah.
25%. And so that percentage of that floor space would be potentially assessed at a higher parking rate. All with the understanding or intention that if something like this plays out and you have like an enhanced occupant load that's going to visit these locations in an M1 district, that they address and we have adequate parking for those types of developments. So
Okay.
does that make sense?
Yeah, so there's a different number than the.
I can't give you a nice
that's
tidy,
okay, that's
yeah.
Greg,
Yeah.
can I impose upon
Yeah.
you? White Oak Brewery, obviously, is sort of the
Yeah.
reason we're here, because they have a taproom license and they have a microbrewery and they're in an M1 district. As it applies, and I don't know if you've done a whole lot of work, as it applies to that business, what would be, so it kind of puts it in
Okay,
context
so
what the
the White
parking
Oak
requirement would be.
Brewery's in a shared tenant space, or a shared building, so there's one other tenant. They have essentially 3,000 square foot under their ownership.
Right.
So that's going to limit their tap room, per se, to 750 some odd square feet. That type of use is going to require one parking space for every 75 square feet. So in a worst-case scenario, their 750 square foot that they could dedicate toward this tap room would necessitate the need for 10 parking spaces.
Gotcha.
And then in addition to that, for their leftover warehouse area. So to Mark's question, they would need around 14 or 15 spaces for the White Oak Brewery.
Got it.
Both for the production and for the tap room. And then also keep in mind that the back tenant has a parking demand as well. And so as we've done a really quick calculation, they're probably a space or two short if they were to run through this course. But they have opportunities to expand parking if necessary, so,
So in other words, nobody's building a parking garage out of this.
no.
Gotcha. Perfect. Thank you.
Further questions on this item? Please call the roll.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Ms. Gaines?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The motion is approved. We have no new business, so before taking a motion for adjournment, are there comments or concerns? Mr. Fritzen?
Mr. Ulmer asked about the other 0.5% of the sales tax that isn't committed to Connect Transit and the mental health facility and other things that we targeted that money for economic development, tourism, again, promotional things to grow the community, to build the community, to expand the tax base, to expand the visitors to our community that help generate sales tax. And for lack of an ability to determine where we want to go with a soccer facility or public recreation facility of some kind, with the city of Bloomington choosing not to pursue that with us at this point in time, which is fine. That's they have to make their decisions for themselves, and so we have capital improvement projects and community improvement projects that for a 1-year period of time we are putting funds towards those things. We're not tying up that 0.25% or part of that 0.5% in long-term things because we still have hope maybe some other the original thought behind that increase might come to play, or we may be in a position where we have to do something or need to help do something, and we want to have that be nimble and able to respond to that if it happens. So we're going to benefit for the time being with maybe a little more aggressive community improvement budget than what we might have had otherwise. But those are things that come to my mind that would respond to that question he asked.
Mr. Fritzen, if I could add to that, one thing that's important is a fairly significant percentage of that additional revenue from the 1% tax that's not already appropriated is going to roads. $1 million to concrete street repair and improvements, and a substantial amount towards asphalt street resurfacing. This is above and beyond what we do regularly, and then as well as some money towards sidewalk replacement, too.
Motion for adjournment?
Second.
Please call the roll.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Ms. Gaines?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. Preston? Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye, we're adjourned. Thank you.